No, és que tinc poca veu avui justament. Hola, ja? Vale. Bueno, finalment, benvinguts i benvingudes a tots a l'Escola Europea de Primavera d'Història de la Ciència i Divulgació d'enguany. Moltes gràcies per haver vingut, per donar-vos la veu, que no és normalment així, és avui que m'he aixecat d'aquesta manera, però bueno, faré el que podré. Pues això, com deia, moltes gràcies a tots, sobretot a aquells que heu vingut de fora, tant ponents com assistents, o sigui, moltes gràcies. Aquesta és la 12a ja edició d'un esdeveniment que té lloc biennalment des del 2001, que ja són unes quantes edicions, i que és fruit d'una col·laboració estreta entre la Societat Catalana d'Història de la Ciència i la Tècnica i l'Institut Menorquí d'Estudis per establir precisament això, un espai de discussió i d'intercanvi entre professorat, entre alumnat, enguany també entre diferents agents socials, com veurem al llarg d'aquests dies, per intercanviar coneixements sobre temes d'actualitat en història de la ciència i la divulgació, en un ambient distès a Menorca, però d'àmbit internacional. Així que primer de tot, per tant, vull agrair aquesta col·laboració al president de la societat, però a tota la societat en general, per aquesta col·laboració que ja va néixer en el 2001 i també a tots els membres del comitè organitzador de l'edició d'enguany, que són en Ximo, en José Ramon Bartomeu, en Manuel Rodríguez i també en Ivan Murray, i a totes les noves entitats que aquest any s'hi han sumat, com són la Universitat de les Illes Balears i també l'Institut López Piñero, la Universitat de València, i també l'Agència Menorca Reserva de Biosfera, que també ha volgut contribuir en aquesta edició d'enguany. La veritat és que us deixaré els detalls de l'edició d'enguany en Ximo. A jo m'agradaria aprofitar aquests 5 minutets que tinc realment per recordar i per retre homenatge a una figura molt important per l'Institut Menorquí d'Estudis, però també per l'Escola de Primavera i per moltes altres coses, membre també de la Societat Catalana d'Història de la Ciència i la Tècnica, que és en Josep Miquel Vidal Hernández. Ell va ser motor, va ser el primer coordinador científic de l'Institut Menorquí d'Estudis des de la seva creació el 1985 i també va ser impulsor de moltes iniciatives en aquest context, entre moltes d'altres l'Escola de Primavera. Enguany, malauradament, fa 10 anys que va morir sobtadament. I és per aquest motiu que tant l'Institut Menorquí d'Estudis com després el Consell Insular de Menorca han decidit que aquest any sigui l'any Josep Miquel Vidal. Com molts vosaltres sabeu, Vidal no només va ser impulsor de l'Institut Menorquí d'Estudis ni d'aquesta escola, va ser impulsor de moltíssims projectes molt rellevants per Menorca i també per la xarxa de col·laboradors extensa que ell va anar teixint durant tots aquests anys. Però també va ser pioner en història de la ciència i la tècnica a Menorca i especialment dins l'àmbit de la medicina. I de fet, algunes de les seves publicacions més rellevants es van publicar amb un dels coorganitzadors de l'edició d'enguany d'aquesta escola, en José Ramon Bartomeu, però que realment també va fer col·laboracions amb molts altres membres de la societat. I aquest any, de fet, sortirà un llibre, esperem, sí, que sortirà, que recull els principals articles, publicacions en diversos àmbits d'història de la ciència d'ell. Jo crec que podem dir amb tota seguretat que si avui hi ha història de la ciència i de la tècnica a Menorca és gràcies a ell. I només per això ja valdria la pena l'homenatge, però és que ell no va fer només això, va fer moltes altres coses. Podríem seguir durant hores relatant i resumint allò que els seus mèrits, però simplement m'agradaria anomenar un parell més que tenen d'alguna manera a veure també amb la temàtica triada enguany de l'Escola de Primavera. I és que Josep Miquel Vidal, ja des que va venir a Menorca, va tornar de Barcelona i ell va estudiar física, i abans també de la creació de l'Institut Menorquí d'Estudis va estar vinculat i va estar impulsant un munt d'entitats culturals, moviments socials dels anys 70 i que van confluir en una sèrie de mobilitzacions ciutadanes en defensa del territori que podrien definir-se en aquells anys com l'origen de l'ecologisme a Menorca. El moviment en defensa de l'albufera del Grau va ser el primer d'aquests grans moviments que va marcar realment una època i un inici, gràcies al qual, de fet, avui tenim el parc de l'Albufera del Grau i no una urbanització turística a l'Albufera del Grau. I precisament enguany, en aquest context, fa 50 anys del que podríem dir el primer manifest ecologista de Menorca, o sigui que tenim un altre aniversari, 50 anys. Però aquests moviments, com he dit, ja només marquen un inici d'un sentiment col·lectiu pel territori, a més diferenciat de respecte a les altres illes, una cosa que s'està estudiant, de fet, però que té continuïtat en moltes coses, entre d'altres la formació de l'entitat ecologista GOM Menorca, que de fet participa dissabte en una de les taules rodones i després en algun dels blocs d'educació ambiental, en altres lluites també ecologistes que són les que són representades a les fotos que heu vist que donen color a l'edició d'enguany, són fotos d'aquí de Menorca, de moviments ecologistes, i que tenen també un altre punt culminant anys més tard i d'una altra naturalesa, un altre punt culminant d'aquesta història de la relació de la societat menorquina amb el seu territori i és la declaració Menorca Reserva de Biosfera el 1993, enguany fa 30 anys, o sigui un altre aniversari, que pretén i que té l'aspiració d'esdevenir, per tant, des de llavors, un model de sostenibilitat. És un camí, no és una fita assolida, tant ambiental com també a nivell social, cultural i econòmic. I en aquest projecte, de fet, torna a aparèixer Josep Miquel Vidal. Ell hi va jugar un paper molt important i destacat. De fet, va ser gràcies a ell, en el seu impuls i a través d'ell, de l'IME, que es van organitzar unes primeres jornades de 1989 en què es va posar la llavor, es va començar a debatre la necessitat de fer una cosa així per aturar també uns certs moviments i tendència també a tornar en el desenvolupisme, diguem. I aquesta iniciativa, una sèrie de coses que passaven que no agradaven en relació amb el territori, a la societat menorquina, i aquest camí va culminar a la declaració de Menorca Reserva de Biosfera. O sigui que tenim 3 aniversaris, 50 aniversari del primer manifest ecologista de Menorca, d'alguna manera, després s'hauria de definir, d'estudiar, perquè això és un camp a Menorca per estudiar realment, o sigui, és un camp obert. Els 30 anys de Menorca Reserva de Biosfera, no sé com de quina manera aquests 2 aniversaris es vinculen i es poden vincular avui, seria important també estudiar-ho de forma detinguda. Hi ha també, de fet, estudiosos que intervindran dissabte que ja hi estan fent estudis, però és un camp obert encara, i 10 anys de la mort d'aquesta figura clau per tota Menorca i en realitat per la història contemporània de Menorca. Jo trobo que apareix en molts moments claus de la nostra història i per tant val la pena i volem aprofitar aquest aniversari per recordar-lo i per tant, i més que mai en aquesta escola de primavera que va ser també fruit de la seva creació. Per tant, 3 aniversaris que indiscutiblement jo crec que són una crida precisament a repensar les transicions ecològiques des d'un punt de vista social i humanístic. I amb això ja dono la paraula a en Jesús Català. Hauria de punxar.
Bé, abans de tot, agrair el record que has fet d'una persona per a mi fonamental en els darrers anys dels anys que ell va estar vinculat a la Societat Catalana d'Història de la Ciència Tècnica i com a principal impulsor de l'escola primavera. Era un d'estos valors
I jo ara molt breument, en nom també dels organitzadors d'aquesta edició de l'Escola de Primavera, el que volia era referir-me breument a les particularitats d'aquesta edició i un poc explicar què ens ha dut així i a plantejar les coses com les hem plantejat i com les plantejarem en aquesta escola. Cal dir que, tal com plantejava Jesús, en realitat va ser al si d'algunes de les reunions del Consell Directiu de la Societat Catalana d'Història de la Ciència i la Tècnica que començarem a parlar de l'interès que podia tenir plantejar ja una nova edició de l'escola, després que en aquest cas feien menys d'un any que havien tingut l'escola anterior, i això també ha condicionat un poc el plantejament que hem fet d'aquesta edició. Però en realitat, tot i que començar a parlar-se en aquell moment, va ser en realitat amb una visita d'alguns dels membres de la direcció de l'Institut Menorquí d'Estudis a l'Institut Interuniversitari López Piñero, en què començarem ja a parlar de què havíem de fer i on prenguérem ja la determinació de tirar endavant aquesta proposta d'escola, i en la que decidirem també el tema que anava a ser principal en aquesta escola, un tema fonamental i un tema que necessàriament ha de ser interdisciplinari, com és el de les transicions ecològiques, aquelles que sí o sí hem d'encetar ja. Cal dir que, com estàvem explicant Marta i Jesús, així estem donant continuïtat a un projecte sòlid que s'ha desenvolupat durant més de 20 anys, però per com s'ha plantejat i per la temàtica triada té aquestes peculiaritats que volia destacar. D'una banda, dir que en les últimes edicions de l'Escola de Primavera normalment s'optava per se seleccionaven 4 o 5 professors internacionals de l'àrea en la que anàvem a centrar-nos, i a partir d'ahí se feia com un call for papers i hi havia propostes d'investigadors predoctorals, postdoctorals, que també estaven treballant en aquesta àrea, i aquest era el funcionament habitual. En aquest cas hem funcionat d'una manera molt diferent i ho hem fet per els temps, i ho hem fet també perquè la temàtica creiem que permetia plantejar-ho d'una altra manera. Hi ha hagut un canvi també important amb el tema de la llengua, que moltes vegades havia sigut la vehicular, la llengua franca, l'anglès, i en aquest cas tindrem intervencions en anglès, en castellà i també en català. Potser això podríem dir que li lleva projecció internacional en certa mesura, però d'altra banda guanyem en l'impacte local i en el que és la vessant més social, jo crec, d'aquesta escola, en tant que via per a crear una comunitat, diguem-ne, més cohesionada, acadèmica, però també activista en un territori determinat, com pot ser l'àmbit dels Països Catalans, i per tant creiem que això ens ha permès tenir uns participants amb un perfil que no és l'habitual, però del que podrem traure molt de profit. Així superem algunes fragmentacions territorials, però sobretot disciplinars, i aquesta és la qüestió en la que volia fer èmfasi. És veritat que en altres escoles no ens hem quedat només en l'àmbit estricte de la història de la ciència, però en aquest cas és evident que aquesta interdisciplinaritat o multidisciplinarietat, cadascú des de la seva àrea, va tenir un protagonisme que no havia tingut abans. I per a una temàtica com la que anem a tractar, aquesta, diguem-ne, de la crisi ecològica, de la necessitat d'una transició ecològica, és fonamental. Per tant, tindrem de la mà la història de la ciència, però també l'àmbit de la història ambiental, de l'ecologia política, de l'economia ecològica, de la sociologia ambiental, etc. Volem així impulsar un debat que considerem necessari i que reclama aquesta superació d'unes barreres disciplinars que potser són molt adients per a fer efectives o impulsar carreres acadèmiques en un moment determinat, però que és evident que és insuficient i fins i tot contraproduent per tal de fer front a una problemàtica de la complexitat i de la magnitud d'aquesta crisi ambiental. Bé, d'altra banda, dir que una altra novetat que hem introduït és també donar aquesta dimensió híbrida. Creiem que hi ha molta gent que s'havia mostrat interessada per participar d'aquesta escola d'alguna manera o de poder seguir-la, però que per qüestions de recursos econòmics, de temps o el que fora, no podia vindre fins a Maó. I per tant hi haurà aquest seguiment, aquesta possibilitat de seguiment via online d'aquesta escola. Però volíem també mantenir aquesta part presencial perquè sabem que la via online no pot suplir tot el que ens aporta aquesta presencialitat, sobretot en base a les qüestions que destacava abans. Bé, i si de cas podem deixar ara, tenim la qüestió un poc d'explicar com s'estructurarà. Ja sabeu que funcionarem, hi ha 4 blocs a partir de demà en què s'estructura l'escola de primavera. Tindrem un primer bloc sobre economia ecològica i de creixement. Després hi haurà a la tarda un bloc dedicat als tòxics, a la història de la producció, de l'exposició, de la regulació de tòxics. I després dissabte hi hauria un primer bloc dedicat a la qüestió de la recuperació, conservació, però també l'accessibilitat als fons i a la memòria de l'ecologisme, i un últim bloc sobre educació ambiental. Però els detalls, diguem-ne, d'això, si de cas els veurem ja demà al matí, podrem donar algunes indicacions sobre com anem funcionant i així no cal que allarguem innecessàriament la inauguració. Començarem ara amb la conferència inaugural de Marco Armiero i res, i per aquesta inauguració, per tancar-la, simplement novament donar les gràcies per la vostra implicació, ja sigui, com dèiem, com a ponents o com a un públic que segur que serà molt actiu en aquesta edició. Moltes gràcies.
Ja ho presentes tu.
Sí, i ara Marco... Sí. Molt bé, doncs anem a passar ja a la conferència inaugural i presentaré ara molt breument a Marco Armiero, ja que és ben conegut entre el públic assistent, i simplement anotar algunes qüestions. És evident que és ben conegut com a historiador ambiental, que des del 2019 és president de la European Society for Environmental History i des de fa uns mesos és professor sènior ICREA a l'Institut d'Història de la Ciència de la Universitat Autònoma de Barcelona. Però la seva trajectòria ha estat eminentment internacional, des de la seva formació i després també iniciant-se en la docència en l'àmbit italià, en la seva Itàlia natal, però després obtenint una sèrie de contractes postdoctorals en universitats nord-americanes de prestigi com Yale, com Berkeley, com Stanford, i després tornant novament al Mediterrani amb un contracte Marie Curie en l'ICTA a la Universitat Autònoma de Barcelona també. Va romandre allà, després va anar a Coimbra, on va estar treballant al Centre de Ciències Socials, i després iniciava una etapa que ha estat ocupant els últims 10 anys a Estocolm, una nova etapa en la que ha estat dirigint l'Environmental Humanities Laboratory al Royal Institute of Technology. Des d'aleshores ha continuat també, el 2021 obtenia una plaça, una càtedra en l'Institut d'Estudis sul Mediterráneo, i després també realitzava una estada a Princeton com a Barron Visiting Professor. La seva recerca ha donat lloc a tot un conjunt de publicacions molt amples, molt diverses, que s'han emmarcat fonamentalment en 3 àmbits temàtics, en l'àmbit de la justícia ambiental, el de les migracions i el medi ambient, i en l'àmbit de feixisme i natura. I avui hem de destacar entre les seues obres la seva monografia, Wasteocene, Stories of the Global Dump, que es publicava per primera vegada el 2021 amb Cambridge University Press i que ha començat també a rebre diverses traduccions. Ara parlàveu sobre un nou projecte de traducció d'aquesta obra al castellà i a diferents llengües, mostrant també l'impacte que està tenint aquesta obra. Una obra en la qual ens convida a cercar el rastre de l'antropocè, el capitolocè en l'organosfera i no només en la geosfera o no en la geosfera, així com en les ecologies humanes i les seues interseccions amb el medi ambient. Una obra en la que Marco Armiero introdueix tota una sèrie de conceptes que ara podrà desenvolupar, comentar, els wasting relationships, toxic narratives, per tal d'explicar millor les terribles conseqüències ambientals però també socials que té aquest sistema capitalista en el que malauradament continuem immersos. Bé, i sense més dono la paraula a Marco perquè desenvolupi la seva presentació i després tindrem temps per als comentaris, per al debat amb tots els assistents. Gràcies, Marco, com vulguis.
Gracias. So I really want to first of all apologize because now you will hear me talking in something that I think is English. I am not completely sure, but it's something around English. I can try Catalan or Spanish, but believe me, it would be much worse than my English. What we should do is me speaking in Italian. I am pretty sure that you will understand a lot, but let's stay with English. And really, thank you so much for your patience. I think that in 20, 30 years, I will be very fluent in Catalan. So just invite me in 30 years and it will be fine. So first of all, many thanks to the Catalan Society for History of Science, in particular to Cimo and Marta for your invitation, and also to the whole organizing committee for this school. And of course, my gratitude to all of you that are listening to me today, here and somewhere in the virtual world. So this is what I'm going to tell you today. So I will lead you through an exploration of the Wasteocene and of the places where common practices are sabotaging it. These are more or less the themes that I'm going to touch upon today. But my presentation will be articulated in 4 parts. But this is a little bit of fun, so I am not anticipating the 4 parts, so you will, I am trying to keep you awake if possible. Okay, so let's start with the first part, part 1, Beyond the Gods Trick. Respiratory failure due to COVID-19, no prior illness. The patient was in England in early March. He had high fever and a lot of coughing. He cannot breathe and has tachypnea with a rate of less than 40 per minute and a continuous need for oxygen. The patient needs to be intubated. The patient occasionally opens eyes, grasps hands, and asks for sleep. The patient lost 1 kilogram in 1 day. He vomited in the evening. We increased the propofol, but the patient is very scared, started coughing, and tried to sit up in bed to vomit. The situation is critical. Let's call the family. From the hospital diary of Marco in intensive care. So this is from my own diary in intensive care. I got very sick in March 2020. So because the Wasteocene, the age of waste, is never impersonal, it is not like the Anthropocene, the geological age of humans, stuff that you read about in books that the scientist on TV explains to you. The Wasteocene mixes with your body. You breathe it into the air. Often you start ingesting it as early as breast milk. The Wasteocene enters homes, kitchens, and bedrooms. Of course, the homes of those who have homes. So let's go back just 1 second. I wrote this book during my long convalescence, maybe we can just for a moment look for the cover of the book. No, it's not here anymore. Sorry for this. Okay. I wrote this book during my long convalescence. I became seriously ill with COVID-19, as I told you. I almost died. I said goodbye to my family over the phone because, according to the doctors, I was in danger of not surviving the night. So why share with you, with strangers, more or less strangers, my illness, my hospital diary? As a scholar, I think that what I study and write about has to do with personal, my biography, my history. I wrote this book when I came out of the hospital after a month with 15 kilograms less, the strange voice from intubation, and wild monsters that showed up every time night fell and darkness brought me back to the coma in the ICU. How can I tell you about this book, the Wasteocene book, without telling you all this? My life is intermingled in the pages of the book. The disease peeps through the toxic waste data and the Agloboshi landfill in Ghana. My childhood intermingles with the socio-ecological relationships of Naples, my hometown back in Italy. They materialize in my life as a poor schoolmate collecting cardboards in the street of Naples, or as the 1973 cholera epidemics, a time in which there was no Facebook or social media. So my parents were stupid enough to trust the doctors, and they even, they were protesting to have more vaccination. As you can see, progress arrived, and finally, now we know what to do with epidemics. Just look on Facebook. So the first sight of this exploration, of any exploration of the Wasteocene, is oneself. It's our own body, and its intertwined connection with ecologies and memories, and the structural power inequalities in which we are all entrenched. Because the Wasteocene, the age of waste, is never impersonal. It is not like the Anthropocene, the geological age of humans, stuff that you read about in books that the scientist on TV explains to you. The Wasteocene mixes with your body, you breathe it into the air. Often you start ingesting it as early as breast milk. The Wasteocene enters homes, kitchens, and bedrooms. Of course, the homes of those who have homes. Now, part 2, body telling, or a stratigraphy of the organosphere as power matters. Everybody's digging, although with different aims. BP, which would be British Petroleum, but now calls itself Beyond Petroleum, the power of words, digs very deep wells, even into the sea, in search of oil, precisely. Gabriel Resources digs in the Pink Mountains of Romania for gold. They dig up the mountains of the Susa Valley in Italy to run the high-speed train, the progress that runs as fast as a useless train, as a useless progress. Geologists dig, also geography. Geologists dig to find out if we have finally entered the Anthropocene, the age of humans, and where the unmistakable sign of our power as a species lies. It seems to be in the 1940s and 50s when the nuclear power left their atomic signature written in the geosphere. What would we see if we could dig into people's bodies? What layers would come out? I imagine in the body of a worker, of a factory worker, we would find traces of the Asbestocene, and then traces of the CVMocene, vinyl chloride monomer, then the PVOcene. For miners, we will find the Silicocene. For agricultural workers, the Glyphosatocene. For all and every subaltern, the Wasteocene. The area in which capitalism produces wasted people and communities to be discarded once every last drop of value has been extracted from them. Words are powerful. The Anthropocene sounds so neutral, scientific, clean. You say Anthropocene and you already feel like a scientist, don't you? The Anthropocene speaks of a universal we, responsible for the planetary mess we are all in. Many scholars have found the Anthropocene narrative problematic. In particular, they, I should say we, have criticized the controversial we of the Anthropocene narrative. The we in the Anthropocene is we, the humans. The Anthropocene narrative says that it is that we, the responsible for the present ecological crisis. Course of social sciences and humanities scholars have manifested their contrariety to this argument that they believe is flattening social and racial inequalities, even history in itself, as the ecological death theory has proved. For this reason, radical scholars have proposed alternative concepts. Capitalocene is one of those concepts. It says that it's not we, the human species, that has caused this planetary mess, but an economic system based on exploitation. The Plantationocene is also powerful. It tells us that the current ecological crisis originates in the plantations, colonial empires, slavery, and racism. So much for the species. The Wasteocene points to toxicity. If the Anthropocene is a planetary disembodied narrative, the Wasteocene, on the other hand, is about communities, bodies, and how a way of producing and consuming transforms everything alive into a gigantic socio-ecological dump. The Wasteocene, then, is not the age of waste, found everywhere on the planet. It is not a difficult academic jargon employed to complain about the filth of our cities, nor is it another word to describe the familiar environmentalist nostalgia for some paradise lost in the past. In fact, the Wasteocene is as much about cleanliness and aseptic environments as it is about filth and contamination, because in its true essence, the Wasteocene means discarding, and discarding means deciding what and who has value and what and who does not have value. So I define the Wasteocene not as the age of waste, but as the age of wasting relationships. Wasting relationships produce profit for a few through othering and extraction. Now, the antithesis of wasting relationship, the antidote to wasting relationships is commoning. Commoning reproduces communities through sharing and caring. And we will explore deeper this concept in the last part of my talk. But now let's go to the third part of this talk, so the magic mirror, or making the Wasteocene visible. And this is what I wanted to show you, but somehow the slide disappeared. It's actually from the cover of the Spanish Spanish edition, translation of the book that will come out with the title Wasteocene by Catarata, hopefully in a few months. In the book, I speak of the epiphanies of the Wasteocene, that is, of the sites and times where and when the wasting relationships, and not just waste, become visible. Here the time is short, and so I can just mention some of them very briefly. You don't need sophisticated methodologies to imagine that living in Louisiana's Cancer Alley is like witnessing the daily making of the Wasteocene. 7 oil refineries and 136 petrochemical plants are all crammed into a fairly limited area between New Orleans and Baton Rouge, resulting in a frightening incidence of cancers and other diseases among residents. What we see here is not just the present and ongoing pollution. This is very clear, right? The present and ongoing pollution. But we also can see how racial capitalism produces wasted people and ecosystems through wasting relationships that are embodied in the stratification of racial oppression from the plantation economy to the petrochemical monoculture. If slow violence is the hallmark of the Wasteocene in the Cancer Alley, the Rio Doce in Brazil seems to be the perfect example of the almost explosive violence of extractivism and its effects on the health of humans and non-humans. On November 5, 2015, the Fondão Basin collapsed, releasing some 50 million cubic meters of mineral waste and mud. 9 people were killed, and with them the Rio Doce, the entire river, was killed. The logic of the Wasteocene unites humans and non-humans in its production of wasted lives and wasted places. An entire ecosystem was enslaved to the mining in the usual extractivist regime that produces the ultimate odor, the refusable places and people to be exploited to exhaustion. now I am coming a little bit closer to my own biography. In the 19th and even in the 20th century, Naples in Italy was often hit by cholera epidemics. The mainstream narrative would say that those are times in which we are all in the same boat. It might be true, but that boat would be the Titanic, where class matters a lot. Only 25% of the people in the third class survived, while 75% of the people traveling in the first class survived. So yes, indeed, we are in the same boat, and that in that boat, class matters indeed. In fact, in those epidemics, the poor paid a higher price during and after the epidemics. When an 18-month-old baby, Francesca, died of cholera in 1973, the radical leftist journal Lotta Continua rightly wrote, "It was not the cholera, but capitalist exploitation that killed Francesca." Of course, I am reading Lotta Continua, this radical leftist newspaper from the 70s. The wording, it's very different, right? It's, they are using a language that is so far away from, you know, our times. However, for instance, speaking of the cholera epidemics in the 1970s, they wrote basically the truth. I am quoting more or less. I think I remember. They said something like, more or less, the point, the reality is that the city built by capitalists and for capitalists are not good. They are not providing life for the proletarians. Now, of course, we can laugh. The language is so weird. We don't use this anymore. No, we have completely... Actually, this is the point in which I believe the neoliberal revolution won, because they even take away our ideas and our way of expressing ourselves. But whatever you think, that you might think that that language is very old. But I think that in the very essence, the language is still true. They were completely true in indicating that the cholera epidemics in the 70s was only the, I would say, the tip of the iceberg of a general oppression for the proletarians in the 1970s Naples. Now, those are just a few examples. But perhaps the question for us is, why is it so difficult to see the Wasteocene? Because of course we can see the waste everywhere, but we cannot see the Wasteocene. Why? I believe that it is so difficult because the Wasteocene is not just about toxins, particulates, pesticides. To function, the Wasteocene intoxicates our lives and our stories. The Wasteocene is maintained by a narrative infrastructure that I call a toxic narrative infrastructure. The Wasteocene toxic narratives silence or normalize the transformation of entire communities into dumps. Toxicity poisons bodies, ecosystems, and communities, but also our stories, our memories, and our imagination. Cemeteries can be powerful storytelling devices. Now, with this slide, we are in Fortogna, in the province of Belluno, not far away from Venice, northeast of Italy then. On one side of the slide, the tidy part that you can see here, you see the monumental cemetery completely reorganized in 2002 by the government for the 2,000 people killed in the 1963 Vajont Dam disaster. This memorial replaced the former cemetery that you see from a screenshot from YouTube, right? So this memorial replaced the former cemetery where each headstone was made following the desires of relatives and were decorated with pictures and memories. The headstone of the Paiola family, 7 deaths including 3 children, was perhaps the most emblematic of that place. I am translating from you what is written on it. Brutally and cowardly murdered by inattention and human greed, still waiting in vain for justice for this infamous fault. Premeditated massacre. This is what you could have read there. You cannot read anymore because the headstone has been destroyed for making this fantastic memorial. Indeed, the memory of the Vajont disaster is a controversial one fueled by anger and mourning, while the new monumental cemetery aims to anesthetize it. Instead of headstones and text screaming pain and anger, as the one I have read to you, we have now a tidy, organized memory which evokes silent and peaceful mourning. The Vaillant story is a handbook example of the Wasteocene. Wasting relationships producing wasted people and wasted places for the well-being of someone else, for the superior good of the nation. And I am now quoting, referring to Arundhati Roy. She had this fantastic piece on dams in India with the title, The Greater Common Good. But this was not enough. The Wasteocene needs also to impose a toxic narrative which invisibilizes the story. The Vaillant was never part of the collective history of the nation, normalizes its violence, it is a natural accident, and domesticated the memory, the anesthetic memorial I have described here. And now I am moving to the fourth part of this presentation. So the ruins, well, actually, the revolution will save us. Can one detoxify from the Wasteocene? Can we free ourselves from the toxic infrastructure that poisons bodies, histories, communities, and relationships? Some scholars repeat that we must inhabit toxicity, that the world we live in, that we ourselves are hybrids, cyborgs. Purity is an illusion, a dream that looks so much like a nightmare, filled as it is with racist references. There is life in the ruins of capitalism and its extreme edge. They say, certainly all true, yet I don't know how to explain myself, but there is something that leaves me uncomfortable with this narrative. I guess it is easy to speak of the regenerative power of ruins if you are not trapped there. I guess it is easy to say that everything is toxic if your level of daily toxicity is not making your kids sick every time they drink. Purity does not exist, and I agree with this, but toxicity does. The Wasteocene is based on this founding principle and practice. Someone and something is to be rejected, and what matters is the separation between who and what is worth and who and what is worthless. For me, it is not the ruination, as some scholars say. It's not the ruination that will save us. For me, it is commoning what transforms the socio-ecological dump sites of the Wasteocene into community gardens. Certainly, this is not the garden of gated, sanitized, purified communities, but neither those gardens are coming out from the consumption, the natural consumption of capitalism. Commoning is the antidote to the Wasteocene. Just as the Wasteocene produces and reproduces through relationships of exploitation and consumption, commoning, on the other hand, is made up of relationships of reproduction and care. I have seen gardens flourishing. I have seen communities dancing around toxic fires. In Tuzla, Bosnia and Herzegovina, where women workers and their neighbors and students gathered together around a decommissioned chemical factory, the DITA factory, a permanent dispenser of toxicity, and in demanding justice for those who become sick, soil remediation, jobs, they also rediscovered that they were a community and founded the Workers' University. Maybe we can skip this one. I have also seen a lake spring up in the ruins of Snia Viscosa in Rome. I discovered the history of Snia Viscosa while watching a music video by a hip-hop group, Assalti Frontali, beautifully entitled The Fighting Lake. The plant, this factory, had worked from 1923 to 1954, producing synthetic fiber, rayon, through the use of carbon disulfide, an extremely toxic chemical. After production ceased, the factory remained abandoned for decades, until in the 1990s and 2000s, when it became the target of several projects of development, aiming at turning the industrial area into a shopping mall or a certain point in a residential complex. And you see the ruins of the factory here. As a movement from below began to mobilize to defend the area, occupying part of the buildings for the purpose of housing cultural and political activities, nature also appeared to rise up against the development plan. Here is the lake. Basically, the lake started emerging among the ruins of the factory. The developer tried to solve the problem in a very, Italian way, probably, pumping the water into the sewage. You can imagine the result. I don't think I need to explain what happened to the neighborhood if you pump a lake into the sewage system. But in a way, this was also a way for the people to discover what was happening inside this place, because it was not possible to see what was happening, even if they saw actually some birds arriving. So this is why we are also talking about a multi-species alliances in this specific case of struggle. Anyway, the story of Snia Viscosa sheds light on the logic of the Wasteocene and at the same time on its possible alternatives. Recovering what has been discarded, that is putting it back to work, is one of the possible outcomes of the Wasteocene logic. From the ruins of an abandoned factory may well rise a shopping mall. But this in no way challenges the wasting relationship that have contaminated the workers and their community. What really challenges the logic of the Wasteocene is commoning as a practice, because it creates a different set of relationships based on reproduction and care, rather than on exploitation. Just as the Wasteocene manifests itself through the imposition of toxic narratives and the erasure of, some lines from the music video that I just mentioned to you. Anyway, so just as the Wasteocene manifests itself through the imposition of toxic narratives and the erasure of narratives of resistance, so the struggle against it passes also through the construction of insurgent archives, such as those created by the Workers' University in Tuzla and by the activists at the former Snia Viscosa in Rome, because these activists actually, they have found in the factory all the files of the workers. They were basically abandoned in the factory. So you really see wasted people, wasted places. The stories, the life stories of those people were abandoned, was trash. And they decided to create, I think that you can translate from the Italian, this Centro Documentazione Territoriale, so a center of documentation, like an archive. The archive is dedicated to Maria Baccante. Maria Baccante was a former worker there, was also a partisan who fought against the Nazi-fascist occupation and the union organizer. So you need to, as I was saying, just as the Wasteocene manifests itself through the imposition of toxic narrative, so the struggle against it passes also through the construction of alternative archives, of insurgent archives. And you have here also this graphic novel published by the people in Tuzla. What happened in Tuzla was really a very interesting combination between the activists and the university. They created something called the Workers' University. Interesting, not always possible everywhere, I guess. And they have produced this graphic novel about the resistant history of these workers, of this workers' community. And I am concluding now. So there are, and I mean, what I want to stress here is that you can see this image, right? And here you see the ruins that are, the nature and life coming back after the ruins of capitalism. You have a factory abandoned, you have then the lake, the people canoeing. I didn't put, maybe, as I said, there are birds and so on and so forth. I do not agree that it's the ruination of capital what is producing this. I think that what is producing this is a commoning revolution. It's the idea of building a different set of relationship. I don't believe, I am not buying the idea that we sit and wait for the ruins of capitalism and something beautiful will appear. I think it's very comfortable, especially if you are sitting in a nice place in your nice apartment somewhere. If you are actually trapped into the ruins, I have the impression that it's less nice and beautiful to wait for the ruins to change nature. So they are the tidy, clean, aseptic gardens, those, yes, protected by walls and gates, where life seems well preserved, like a frozen food in a refrigerated tub in a department store. And then there are the commons, the space stolen from capitalism, taken away from the toxic relationships between people, things, plants, animals, and spirits. It is the common in relationships that produce and protect the garden. It is about freeing ourselves from the toxic relationships that construct the Wasteocene, that make profits for a few. It is about sabotaging the toxic narratives that justify and invisibilize the Wasteocene. Because commoning, the socio-ecological relationships based on caring and sharing, are never impersonal. They are not like the Anthropocene, something that you read about in books, that the scientist on TV explains to you. Commoning mixes with your body, you breathe it into the air. Often, you ingest it at communal dinners with your comrades. Commoning enters in your life, in your kitchen, in the books you read or write, creating new multi-species communities, of course, for those who are willing to fight. Thank you.
Okay, many thanks, Marco, for your talk. And now we have time for any comment, questions, I guess in any language.
any language. But please speak slowly.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. It's very interesting and enriching perspective on what you see and how waste relates with power relations. My question is about there is this international UN treaty on plastic pollution that there is like a commitment to get it signed in the 2024. I guess it's not about commoning at all, but I would like to know, under your perspective, if there is any opportunity with this treaty to stop, somehow stop this wave of pollution, and if also there is any window of opportunity for reparation as well to fight against the injustice, power relations in this economic system.
Should I answer or?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. I am a little bit now, I am struggling myself because sometimes I am a bit skeptical of international treaty, even if with the ozone layer we were actually successful. So, I mean, I should not be so skeptical. I believe that every window, I mean, you know that, again, quoting Arundhati Roy has written that, you can look at, crisis like the pandemic, for instance, as a window of opportunity. Then the window is not telling you where you are looking at. It's up to you to build something with this window, to force, I would say, to open the window in a certain direction. So I completely agree. I mean, personally, I believe that the issue is treaties are very important, especially if there is someone watching in the streets, if there is somebody really, putting pressure, because these are not just on paper, that can become something more important. I think that our Zin once said that it's very important who's sitting in the White House, but more important is who's marching outside the White House. No? And I would say that it's a little bit similar, although with Mr. Trump, we might also say that there's a nuclear problem here, and so also sitting there is not so bad, avoiding to kill all of us. So yes, so the treaty I think is a window of opportunity. You might I would say that there is also something related with commons, because I mean the problem I don't need to tell you this to you, because most likely you know this better than me, but the mother of all stupid assumption about commons is Garrett Hardin. Now, right, and Garrett Hardin, he misunderstood the open access with commons. And of course, there are open access resources. The ocean is one of the open access, no? The air, the atmosphere, and so on and so forth. So if we can somehow implement some kind of common rules to make these open access resources a little bit less open access and more look like commons, I think everything is welcome. Regarding reparation, I think that reparation is the biggest issue, because many times, first of all, the big issue, at least the cases I have studied, I mean, I should not generalize, but the cases I've studied, what is happening is that, you know, a corporation is making profits, contaminating everything. I think that economists would say externalizing the costs, but what is happening is that then the costs are socialized. So we pay for the reparation, for the decontamination, for the health problem of people, and so on and so forth. I am also very interested, I am a humanities guy, as you can guess. So I am also very interested in the narrative reparation. So it's called, many scholars have been talking about narrative justice. So what is narrative justice for me? Is, for instance, with the Vaillant dam disaster. By the way, today I finished my book on the Vaillant. I mean, I am not even believe myself. Apparently, it's done. I am very proud of myself. And of course, it's 10 years, so I should not be proud, right? But, you know, it looks nice. Anyway, so the Vaillant. At the Vaillant, for instance, the people are asking now to receive a formal apologies from the Italian government. You might say it's laughable. You know, 2,000 people were killed. Right. Anyway, they cannot get this. I mean, there is no way. You know, they got money. They got money because, you know, the hydropower, the hydroelectric company was found guilty, so they paid and so on and so on. I mean, very little, by the way. But anyway, they paid. The people who were, you know, found guilty in the trial, they got 5 years in prison for killing 2,000 people. 5 years. By the way, only one went to prison, actually, for 1 year and not 5. And he was actually treated like a king with the food coming from the corporation every day to the prison. Better than me, I think. Anyway, the situation is, so reparative justice and can also be interesting in the narrative justice. What does it mean, for instance, to have some kind of narrative reparation? In Italy, there is a lot of discussion about telling the dark side of the economic miracle. You know, in the 60s, we became rich. Sure, we became rich, it's true. Somebody also became sick because somebody else needed to become rich. So the point was, can we also provide some kind of narrative reparation? And I think that this is also interesting and something that maybe us as historians could also provide, no? I am not a legal scholar, I am not a lawyer, I am almost useless in any kind of environmental conflict, this is my impression. But maybe one thing I can do is precisely to provide some kind of narrative justice, to tell stories that no one has been told. For instance, when I spoke about the Vaillant dam disaster and I said that the people were killed, people in the room from the community said, you know, it's the first time that our relatives have been killed. Because generally they died. In the Italian narrative, general narrative, I mean, because capitalism is magic. It's the best revolution ever. It's a revolution without anyone get killed. You know, you die on your duties, you die in the factory, you die for a terrible dam disaster. No one has ever been killed. So I wouldn't say that it's a lot. I wouldn't claim that I've done so much, but maybe something that we can consider in terms of reparation. And of course, the big issue is to make the polluters, you know, first of all, not pollute, because, you know, it can be even convenient to pay afterwards. But anyway, for those who has been already contaminated, somebody should pay, and it should be the one making profit. Because, you know, necrocapitalism, I am stealing from Achille Bembe, necrocapitalism is basically a capitalism making profit out of the death, not only of the life. We know that capitalism is able to appropriate lives to make profit, but maybe the assumption is that also death can be put at work in the necro-capitalism regime. I don't know, I didn't answer your question, but I talk a lot, which is a good, I think I was trained to do that during, long years of being an academic.
Thank you very much for this inspiring talk. The question is, what are the relationships and differences between Capitalocene and Wasteocene?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Marta. Well, in the conclusion of the book, I try to be very clear on this because somebody, especially some Swedish colleagues, they told me, Marco, you are lucky. You are so lucky because you invented your own word, so now your H index will go very up. And I think that it's so sad and so, against everything you believe that I think it's really so. In a way, I would say, use Capitalocene. Capitalocene is a better expression. So first of all, I want to acknowledge the work done by others before me. I wouldn't think about the Wasteocene without Jason Moore. I wouldn't think of the Wasteocene without the work of Stefania Barca on forces of reproduction. I wouldn't do this without, racial capitalism. I wouldn't do that without Joanne, that is here, and the environmentalism of the poor, Rob Nixon, slow violence. So first of all this, in a sense, I do believe that Capitalocene can be a bigger umbrella. However, trying to make my point, because after all, I am paid to make a point, right? I think that maybe there are a few differences with the Capitalocene. I think the Capitalocene is looking especially to the causes, so the roots of the crisis. I think the Wasteocene is looking more at the consequences, the effects of the crisis. I think that the Capitalocene is a little bit, I think, not embodied enough. I mean, the Wasteocene, clearly the Wasteocene is something that you experience through your body, to your community, and so on and so forth. And I think there is something that is coming from feminist thought and thinking and philosophy from here. And of course, there is also another thing that you might also consider, that I have seen the Wasteocene used also by scholars, colleagues who disagree actually with me that capitalism is the big issue. So they say it's not about capitalism, it's about the Wasteocene, because the Wasteocene works with the Soviet Union, China, and all these countries that, according to them, were socialists, believe it or not. So, or art socialists. So this is maybe this is another difference. But I want to acknowledge absolutely that without that work, my work wouldn't make sense. And I am absolutely in that with those scholars. So the conclusion in the book is precisely trying to go against this very sad winter of publish or perish academia in which we are. So you invent a word so people will quote you. And I mean, there's nothing wrong about inventing a word. What is wrong is that in order for your word to work is that you need to say that what has been done before doesn't count, in a sense. It's the last thing. While I of course I'm happy if somebody would relate with the Wasteocene somehow. I'm very happy about this. Some PhD students are trying to apply these ideas of the wasting relationship, of the toxic narratives and racism. Of course, I am very happy. But, I am also happy if they use Capitalocene. I don't think that, you need to make a choice and, I am trying to sell. I am a very bad seller. I am an historian basically because I am completely unable to make money. So it was the best, job I could find with my very limited skill of selling anything, including myself. So.
But since we are among friends, so I would, apart that you are quite able to make money by becoming an ICREA.
It's true. It's true. It's true. Well, this is the Catalan God. Yeah.
No, I want to say something because I'm thinking, I want to do a little, what they say is an ecological economist, influenced, as we are all, by Georgescu Reagan, the entropy law, and the economic process. And sometimes, if I talk to journalists, for instance, they find it very difficult to understand the entropy law.
It's true.
And they give examples that you cannot cook the same meal with the same gas twice and so on. Thinking that they know I have seen somebody already, and I'm very tempted to do it myself, to say that we are in the Anthropocene, in the Capitalocene, also in the plantation scene since the 18th century, but also in the Anthropocene.
Just.
Entropy from Anthropocene from anthropos, not from anthropos, but
For entropy.
And how do you think of this? I don't say that you don't mind. I mean, it's like an objection in a way, isn't it? Because Wasteocene allows you to go into all this body toxicity, and the others to say, okay, we know this, but we go a little bit up into thermodynamics,
Yeah.
and then seem more convincing.
I think that you could be more convincing if you do it. If I do it, I will do so poorly that people will laugh. No, I mean, I agree with you, and I think that, it's completely true that, so first of all, maybe one thing I can say is a little bit about this labeling race. I have been working on this a little bit, and if you go around, you see every kind of Ocene. If I want, I can show you. I mean, but yeah, oh my. Well, this one is just for Anglo because it's even impossible to pronounce. It's really hard way, it's kind of. But I think it's somewhere here. If I am. It's here. Exactly. You have the white main Ocene, the plantation Ocene, the growth Ocene. It's also interesting, I think. I think the Nogard came up with this. Econocene. Maybe Alfomborg came up with something like the Technocene, if I'm not mistaken. Exactly. So in a sense, I'm also scared because I think, oh my God, this is so stupid. Also because I know that the whole point is to get your H index. So, but I guess that we are talking about the popular Anthropocene. So I am not discussing about the geological age of humans. The geological group is working on this, and I am sure they will do a good job. I hope they will find a different name. I think Anthropocene is a bad name, but who cares? And I also don't like the idea that if you are using the Anthropocene, you are the bad guy. There are people sometimes Jason Moore can be a little bit very upset with using the Anthropocene. I understand the point, absolutely understand the point. But, for instance, my dear friend Laura Pulido, she wrote an essay with the title, Race in the Anthropocene. I mean, would you argue that Laura doesn't know what is race and in the Anthropocene? So she didn't use a different word, but who cares? I mean, her essay on race in the Anthropocene is, for me, foundational anyway. So, I would say, use the label that is useful for you. Maybe what is important is the narrative and that you are delivering, right? If you are delivering a narrative in which we, the humans, are responsible, well, use whatever word you are using, I am against you. But then if you are using the Anthropocene and you speak about race in the Anthropocene, we are friends. Then the entropy, regarding the entropy, John, I think that you are right that I think that the limitation in the Wasteocene is that the Wasteocene is very place-based, very rooted. Even the book is it can be, you can say that it's anecdotal. Yeah. I think that it's true, very empirical based, a lot of example, and people might say that maybe it doesn't work so well with the Earth system sciences. Well, UK also say that the Earth system sciences are not working so well for the planet anyhow. So let's try something. And at least I am I am a storyteller. So let me do my job and you do yours. But I completely agree that there is this limitation. A good friend of mine, in a very gentle way, a bit like Joanne, I guess, John McNeill, a famous environmental historian, he was a little bit critical of some of my assumptions in a very, very nice way. I mean, I wish all my critics could be like John. And he said, Marco, but for instance, I like the commoning that you are proposing, but John McNeill said, I don't think that this can save the planet from the climate crisis. It's beautiful, but I cannot. And you know, some critiques are good because make you think, and I think it's very important also to be critical of yourself. My answer to this is that, you know, there is a very nice cartoon. There are two guys sitting together, and there is somebody talking about climate change, and one of the two guys is telling to the other, you know, they are talking about climate change. They want us to stop eating meat and, you know, terrible food, not using our car every day, and by the way, maybe even having a garden outside our house. Can you believe that? And he said, oh my God, I hope that this is not going to happen. All this that you have been talking. So my thing, I said, maybe commoning will not change the planet. But if while changing the planet, my life is a little bit, let's say, shit, I wouldn't say that it's so bad. So if I need to decide where to live, well, I want to live in a place like this one. Not in sense of the ruins, in a place in where people can get together. In a garden like this one, this is actually in Chiaiano, in a place called La Selva Lacandona, like the Zapatista one. You cannot find it on the map because it has a different name, but among activists, they call this place the Selva Lacandona. You see, it's a beautiful place, not because it's beautiful. It's not the best park in the city, but it's beautiful because it's made of the commoning relationship, community of caring and sharing. So, you know, maybe this will not change the planet, but while we are changing the planet, would it be better to have a nice Sunday with those people rather than stay watching something on TV? This is my answer maybe to this.
Thanks for the talk, Mark. Like the idea of the Wasteocene, and I'm very curious to read the whole book.
Thank you.
Gonna challenge this idea of the commons, because in a way, so you talk about two different commons here. So one is the taking over of a factory, but the other is this example of the gardens. And
Yeah.
I agree, this is great, but it's also, it can be also a very privileged way to enjoy a Sunday. So,
Yeah.
you say, yeah, the rules, the idea of the rules is also privileged to, if you are waiting for the rules to flourish, if you are far away from the rules. But I also want to ask you to maybe develop a little bit more the idea of the commons you have and how they will save us from the Wasteocene.
Thank you. Well, maybe just one thing, Lucia, one thing I want to say just for, you know, I am, historians can be very, how can I say, boring and pedant. I mean, this park is in a working class area called Chiaiano, where they built a gigantic dump in the early 2000s. It's a place with, you know, it's, you know, underclass and employed working class people. So, this park has been squatted by a social center, which is a center for political action, Insurgencia. It's a Zapatista political experience. It belonged, used to belong to a mafia family before, and then they squatted that place, entered, and actually three friends of mine, once they arrived in this place, and they found 3 graves with their names on top. So the story is more complicated than this. I don't know if I need to tell you, but basically what happened is that the guy who dug the graves and did this, he was then, after that, he went out with his motorcycle and died in a motorcycle accident. So no one is touching them anymore because there is this legend that it's better not do anything against them, which, you know, was lucky enough. I mean, the guy died, of course, but anyway. So the story is very complicated. So this is about, I agree with you that, you know, there is a green gentrification. Isabel has been talking about this and studying this a lot. Absolutely, you can have, you know, greenification of neighborhoods actually bringing gentrification, and as you said, they can be a place for rich and so on and so forth. I would say that maybe this is not the case. I was a little bit careful with choosing a good example. I don't speak so much in the book of commons, but I speak more of commoning. And I think that for me, here is the same approach I have with waste. Instead of speaking of waste, I speak basically of wasting, and I speak of commoning and not commons, I think it's a little bit a Marxist obsession with reification, that, you know, I am very afraid of, how can I say, of misunderstanding the dialectic processes with the thing. So the waste for the wasting, the commons for the commoning. Why for me it's important to speak about, and again, a huge depth with Massimo De Angelis, with Silvia Federici, just to mention two very important scholars who have been working on this. Well, why it's important to speak of commoning? Because commoning is the process of making the community. I would say it's the socio-ecological infrastructure allowing the commons to exist. And in this sense, the commons are not something residual that you are supposed to defend, but can be something that you can create from scratch. Because, you know, after the big enclosure, we can say that we have very few commons left, isn't it? We are many times forced to defend the very small commons that are still there. While if we think about commoning, I think that we can think of expanding, of having a more, I would say, aggressive approach towards, you know, the capitalist expropriation. For me, commoning is the social ecological infrastructure, is the making of the community, and the making of the community is made of socio-ecological relationship. Just to, for instance, in some cases, you know, in terms of ecologically speaking, we are many times in a difficult situation. Even this area here, well, it's an area which was compromised. It's not a fantastic, as I said, it's not a nice park where you go. We are not sure about what is underground. So commoning is not the magic spell that can transform, you know, the mess of capitalist extraction in, you know, a beautiful garden. Commoning is the making of resistant community, which discovers its history, which is an alternative history. And it's important to discover the history, not because, you know, we think it's important. It's important because when the capitalism is trying to make you into a social dump, well, one of the first things that capitalism is doing is erasing your history. This is what, you know, Lois Gibbs has told us. Naomi Klein said, you know, shock doctrine arise means erasure of any memory in the community. So in this sense, the commoning is, I think, is this social ecological infrastructure allowing for the commons to exist. Of course, this also means that now there are, how do you say this, there are like soil tests. They are trying to understand if there is a way to repair this land. So, but these two things are coming together. So without the commoning infrastructure, without the, you know, the festival that you see here, you wouldn't have the possibility even to reclaim the soil, to improve the real situation of toxicity, and so on and so forth. We had a similar situation. Well, even, I mean, if you look at this lake, it's not precisely, you know, the most beautiful lake where you want to go spend your summer vacation, right? So it's those are, I mean, in this sense, I agree that those are hybrids. I agree that we are in a world full, packed with ruins. What I do not agree is that the ruins are, you know, somehow reproducing, that nature is taking back. Think about COVID-19. Many people have been saying that COVID-19 was also an opportunity for nature to come back. At least in Italy, I don't know about here in Catalonia or in other parts, if there were, you know, for instance, wild animals arriving into the cities were empty, and many people, especially environmentalists, they say, okay, nature is back, and so on and so on. I mean, how can you say that, you know, we are building a different project on a pandemic killing the poor mostly? I think that you need a political project and not just the ruins of something. The ruins of something is not good enough for me. I think it's good enough if you are sitting somewhere and enjoy the view. If you are there, you need a political project. And I think that commoning is first and foremost a political project to build a resistant community. And then hopefully this resistant community can also improve the socio-ecological relationships at large, but sometimes they don't. I remember, for instance, a student of mine studied Can San Juan. I think that you know much more about this than me. If I understood correctly from his dissertation, basically the community lost. I mean, the cement factory is still there. At least was still there when he finished the dissertation. So you can say, okay, it's a lost. It's a story of a loss, of a failure. But on the other hand, Sergio was also Sergio Ruiz Cayuela was also telling me and writing in his dissertation that this community, for instance, opened a theater which was, you know, closed for decades, and they started like a film festival, a poetry festival. They hosted the Zero Waste conference or meeting, and so you may say, okay, Marco, who cares? There is the cement factory. I agree with you. I mean, for me, you know, let's try to get rid of it. I agree. But in the meanwhile, I think that they also reclaimed their identity. That community is not anymore a dump. And Sergio, he told me at least, that the factory offered to sponsor the soccer team of the city, of the town, and basically they said, no, thank you. We are okay. We don't want your money. We have a terrible, you know, stadium. We don't have the money to pay for the nice suits and so on and so forth. But we don't want your money. I think that this is also a story of liberation. Anyway, of course, we are waiting to stop the cement factory. But you know, I don't think that we can say that, you know, doing all this is a failure. I think it would be very stupid, very unfair.
Saturday.
Yeah.
And also the role to play oral history in this sense. And finally, the capacity we have to access to industry archives and you know, the formalism and the legal action we can try to do with group of activists in order to enter in this archive of this industry. No, in many cases, in the case of the tobacco industry and many others, the historian could access the industry archive because there was a time. So I think that I think highlights the idea of having this connection between academia and activist groups, particularly in the case of this
Thank you so much. It's an important question, also for me personally. Again, I am generalizing, so you know, you should tell me what is happening in Catalonia, in Spain, or in other places that you know better than me. My impression that in Italy, historians have mostly been very active in suppressing insurgent archives and actually selling the toxic narrative infrastructure. If I think about, I mean, I am writing now this book on, I wrote this book about the Vaillant, and actually I was looking at if I could find really the information about the Vaillant, just, you know, the information in books about the economic miracle, the 60s. Zero. Not even a footnote, zero. There is no space for 2,000 people killed by modernization and hydro-capitalism in those narratives. So I think that I guess that we have a lot that should be done. The situation was different, I think, in the past. In the 70s, it was not so much about the environment, but about at least the workers. There was something happening with the labor history, with social history, and so on and so forth. So I think that there is a role for us. I speak of insurgent archives. Sometimes people have asked me, so can you define what is an insurgent archives? And of course I start bubbling because I don't know. I mean, I think that for me an insurgent archive is maybe more like something I have been struggling with. How to escape the archival trap, we could say. I mean, we historians, most of us, we are historians here, we are obsessed with archives. It's probably our religion. We go to the archives like, having, a mystical experience. In a sense, I am wondering how can we get free of the, as I said, of the trap of the archive, of the archival regime, you might also say. No, for me, when I was doing my PhD, I have a PhD in economic history, believe it or not. But now it's 25 years that I am not doing economic history anymore, so I am recovered. But when I did my PhD in economic history, my archival sources, I was a good historian at that time. I went to the church, to the archive every day. And my archival sources, they were repeating one story, all of them, thousands of them. They were telling me the problem with the forests in the 19th century Italy are the peasants, are the communities. We need to privatize those damn forests and we will get a good result. All the sources. So the problem is that I thought that this was just, not true. And I tried to do something about this. My supervisor at that time, he told me, well, Dr. Armiero, of course. Dr. Armiero, you are so full of your ideology that you do not follow what the sources are telling you. And the sources are telling you that privatization was the answer. And I said, why I am ideological because I like the commons, and you are not ideological because you like private property. Let's say it's, we are equal, and it's fine, you won historically, but who cares? At least it's not that I am ideological and you are not. So what I did was precisely what you were saying. I went for the trials. The trials are, like really the gold mine for an historian. And of course, I'm thinking of Carlo Ginzburg here, no? It's really, in a sense, for me, the trial is not the church, because the trial is much more confused, and you can hear a lot of voices there. And you can also hear the voices of the people trying to defend themselves. And then I looked also for another sources, which was, I don't know how to say this even in English. In Italian, it's suppliche. So it's like the letters that poor people can send to, the king. Supplica is like, please, please. What would you say in Spanish? I don't know. Maybe you have something similar. Come on. You occupied us for several centuries. Supplicaciones. Supplicatore. Exactly. Well, in a sense, anyway. So I was looking for this, but in a sense, so the point is not to falsify sources. I didn't go to the archive and wrote, we need the commons with the strange. I didn't. But I was looking. I was trying to free myself from the trap of the archives. Being a good historian, I think, looking for different sources, but also being a good comrade and looking for the sources that was, okay with my politics. So I think I did a good job, by the way. Not sure what the supervisor would say. Anyway, so trials can be interesting. So in insurgent archives, mostly something that we can think of, something that can free ourselves, that can maybe, in a sense, give a multiplicity of voices in this, mess of the past. And it's insurgent because it's counter-hegemonic. I think that this is the main issue. It must be counter-hegemonic. We need to sabotage the hegemonic narrative about the past. And in this sense, oral history has been very important. Myself, I have been leading this project, Toxic Bios, inspired by the Atlas, the AJ Atlas, very small in my case, and the idea was to go after the toxic autobiographies of people. For me, the difference with oral history and the toxic autobiographies was, I think, a little bit, for us, was very clear the counter-hegemonic approach. So basically, we were telling people that we wanted to tell a different story about their community. So it was clear our political agenda. Sometimes oral history has not done the same kind of things, especially to try to look like good scholars, because oral historians have been criticized a lot, no? To be not good historians or something like that. So I think it's reasonable, but we try to do this in a different way. Also because, people they didn't want to be interviewed. Basically, there is a joke in the Land of Fires. The Land of Fires is a region in Italy with a lot of contamination and pollution. And there is this joke, what is the typical family in the Land of Fire? Well, it's very heteronormative, but what we can do. The father, the mother, 2 children, and 1 sociologist. And the problem is that we need to feed the sociologist. So, and it's completely true. I mean, when I went in the Land of Fire, people were very, upset. They didn't want to have another, well, they thought I was a sociologist. I am not sure what I am. But anyway, to have another researcher there asking the same question. So in a way, for me, breaking this idea, I am not just collecting an interview. I want a counter-hegemonic story of what is happening, was also a way to be accepted. Otherwise, they wouldn't play again to the same kind of game. And regarding the archive of industry, I mean, I agree with you. Also for the Vaillant dam disaster. By the way, who knew about the Vaillant dam disaster before me talking, Joan? Because it's in the AJ Atlas. No one else. I think it's unbelievable, but I can share with you the shame here, because I didn't know anything about Riba del Lago before I was the supervisor of a Catalan PhD student. So, I mean, Santiago Gorostiza. So, even if Riba del Lago was a terrible thing, I think, if I am not mistaken, maybe 200 people died, but, still, Vaillant 2000. I mean, I am not, trying to do some very terrible comparison, but it's true that it's really, how can I say, it's astonishing, that we don't know about this. So I have the entire archive of the Vaillant Dam disaster because of the trial. So the day after they say the accident, the killing, the PM, the public prosecutor, seized everything in the archive. So it's actually now part of the archive of the trial. So I think that we should look in this. I believe that trials can be really a way for us in. And of course, how can we recover the history of these, grassroots movements? It's a big issue. We don't have a lot of material. Oral history can be the only possibility, but also team up with them. In Naples now we are trying to build an archive, a physical archive with all the documents produced in 20 years of struggles, for instance. And also to be a little bit inventive, I think. Because, for instance, I wouldn't suspect this, but I found a lot of very interesting materials about environmentalist concerns in this, radical leftist newspaper, Lotta Continua. I wouldn't expect they could care about the environment, and actually they don't talk about the environment. If you do the search environment, you find 0. But then if you try to be a little bit, more creative, you see that they were actually interested in this. So I think that it's an open question, and I think that it's not going to be very easy to be solved. But for sure, oral history will be a great possibility. I live in Santiago now. There is a fantastic exhibition right now in Santiago about the Onda Negra. I am saying right. The big oil accident. Prestige. How do you say? It's not Onda Negra. I am inventing. Sorry. Marea. And there is a fantastic exhibition, and they have. It's not just. I mean, the exhibition is really impressive with the pictures and so. But they also found a lot of documents produced by those grassroots organizations. So I think that. But by the way, everything was done not by the historians, by the art, the School of Arts, and I think this is also something for us to think about.
Yeah, indeed, we have now started some collaboration with artists and with also historians of art and so on, and they are really interested in this kind of issues on toxicants, and we are learning about their approach. I just also wanted to go back to a bit of the question by Jose Ramon and Lucia on the commoning and what we do. If you think we should change our approach to the study of commoning and not of the disaster and the positive part instead of always on the critical part of because maybe we have more examples of that. That is one thing that I thought should be considered. No, I don't know if that would be, as a historian, important. And then when studying commoning, also I think it was also raised by Lucia, but I remember that when we were preparing this last book on invisible toxicants with the research project, we had the collaboration by Israel Rodriguez Giral, no? And his paper was very different. He was emphasizing this idea of the care relation and so on. And we had some debates on that issue, not because it was not so much. He was dealing with a case in Puchuncaví in Chile, this chemical industry where you had the important problems of contamination, of pollution, and he was emphasizing these relations of care of the victims, but not as a form of transformative resistance that would denounce the contamination, but as a way to resist. And now in these circles of the insistence on care on some occasions has gone to that part, no? The idea of taking care of ones of others and not so much the traditional resistance of the subaltern movements. No, I don't know if you think this is problematic, no, and if in your idea of commons is both things there, or are you emphasizing more one perspective or the other?
Yes, thank you. So the issue about studying something a little bit depressing, it's true sometimes. This is very, it's very common in environmental history. There is a very famous essay by Bill Cronon saying that, at the end of, he is telling that at the end of each class, of each course, the students are always going out more depressed than ever. So he was asking himself, I am doing a good job or not. Bill Cronon is a very famous environmental historian. So I think that I have a kind of different approach on this, because my book is, most of the book, maybe 80% of the book, 75% of the book is actually depressing, you might say. So it's about the Wasteocene, it's about the wasting relationships, it's about oppression and so on and so forth. And then there is one section in the book which is about precisely sabotaging the Wasteocene and the commoning. I don't think that we can tell one part of the story only. We need to tell both parts of the story. Otherwise, we run the risk of telling, a fairy tale, something about some kind of paradise. Rebecca Solnit, the American writer, she wrote a fantastic book with the title A Paradise Built on Hell. But you need hell to understand that there is a paradise, right? And she was writing about disaster communism. So how, in time of disaster, it's not true that we are killing each other and try to eat each other, as Hollywood is trying to tell us, but many times we are in solidarity with each other. We try to help each other. Disaster communism. So I think we cannot tell one part of the story. We need to tell both parts of the stories. And you know, when people say, but this is depressing and so on and so forth, I mean, I am 56. I remember when I was younger, I remember that there was a movie, for instance, The Day After. I am sure that many of you have seen it. It was about the atomic, the nuclear, holocaust, basically. It was not, a hopefully movie with good sentiment and, everything went okay. The world basically ended in the movie. I hope that I am not spoiling. It's a very old movie. Anyway, so, but it was, I was part of the pacifist anti-nuclear movement, and it was very important for us to understand that nuclear power was not, nuclear bomb and the nuclear war was not something, okay, it's not so good, but take care of each other. We knew that it was the end of the world, and we mobilized because we knew that it was the end of the world. So I am not sure that the point is, to give hope or something like that. Also because it's impossible to give hope. So I think the two things must go together. Now, care and resisting. In my book, in my understanding of the, of the sabotaging the Wasteocene, the two things are coming together. So you build a community because you are resisting together. Now, what is important for me is that, first of all, I am from a generation and from a culture which was eschatological, if it's English. So we were waiting for a revolution that would come and would change the world. In the meanwhile, we were in a shit completely. But, we were really, ready in case the revolution, What I like about the idea of commoning and caring is that we are waiting for the revolution to come. But in the meanwhile, let's try to have a performative politics. Let's try to change the world as we are here. It's like, for me, it's the Zapatista model. It's not, we try to take over the Mexican state. For now, let's try the Caracol to be a different word, because the other word is not only possible, it's already here. So I like this about the caring and sharing, that is as a performative power. We are living the revolution that we are, waiting, expecting, or trying to build. And I think the two things are coming together, because, we were also very fake, If you have a terrible heteropatriarchal collective, leftist collective, and you are not building anything new. You are building the same bullshit over and over with a different color, and you believe that it's much better. So living the revolution that you want is also making us thinking the way in which we are doing this revolution. So I think that in this sense, the caring, the sharing is actually a way to be also self-reflexive. For me, means also to be, for instance, autocritical, self-critical, and try to understand things. I would also add something else. So I collect the two things. Then the other things about the community is that my idea of the community, because what is the community? Oh my God, we can talk for a year about this. But my idea of the community is that I don't believe in a ontological community that is there and is ready to be mobilized. The community is created through the struggle. It's the struggle making the community. It's not that the community is there and is, because in my experience, what happened is that you have also very unexpected communities. People that didn't know each other and started, to become a community precisely mobilizing together. And sometimes communities can also be extremely oppressive. Sometimes I am also surprised that in the left people are really, always saying, oh, the community. In Italy, there are some communities that, oh my God, you want to run away. There was a community in Italy doing a barricades because 12 migrants were brought into the community with a bus, destroying the Catholic Christian Europe, 12 people. What the fuck? I mean, better run away from that community. It's not that because it's a community, it's beautiful. Community, I am interested in a progressive, I would say, how do you say this? There is an English expression when the community is actually a chosen community is by intention, I think it's said in English. So I think that this is something that is interesting. And I would also add something, and this is my last word. Okay, let's say that it's possible, because I've seen this sometimes. Let's say that it's possible that sometimes we are now a little bit trapped into the caring and sharing kind of approach, So that, that sometimes you see these people that they are getting along so well, that their social center is fantastic and they use the right words, but, around them is this capitalist desert. I agree, but who I am to tell them what they have to do? I mean, my generation failed completely. We were talking about a revolution that didn't happen, and in the meanwhile, we were jerks with each other. I mean, to tell you the truth, I agree with you, I have the same kind of feeling, but I am also respectful. If I enter in a place in which those people are, we could say with Hirschman that it's more an exit than a voice, Well, it might be not my community. Maybe I will not stay there for a long time, but I am not criticizing them. I am respecting them. I can give you one example. With Massimo De Angelis, we published an article on Southern Atlantic Quarterly for a special issue on autonomia, so autonomous Marxism in the Anthropocene. And we were talking at a certain point about Aboriginous communities in Australia and, some project in which they were involved. And basically, they were involved in a project of carbon sequestration and so on and so. So one reviewer of the article said, "My God, this is terrible. These indigenous people have been sold. They have sold their souls to the capitalism system and so on. And they should not have done that." And Massimo is much more, how can I say, courageous, I should say, than me. He said, basically he said, okay, but what the fuck? I mean, you are an academic, you get your salary, and you want to tell those people what to do. If they have decided as a community that the best for them would be also to play that card in the game, we are not there to tell them what they need to do and what they don't need to do, because there is also some kind of, of power relationship here in place that you need to consider. So my answer to the care, in my opinion, is part of the struggle. You are building a resisting community. I understand that sometimes it's a little bit introvert, it makes sense, so a bit, inside. And as I said, it's not my style. Probably I would not feel at home, but those are not my enemies.
Playing your cards and trying to reflect on the intersection between history of science or history of technology and environmental history from the other side. I think there is a very interesting group of scholars called STS scholars, Science Technology Studies. They are very keen trying to build up a sort of pattern to analyze scientific controversies, to really go in depth to understand why people disagree, especially when we face an environmental conflict. And in that kind of sociology, you have plural voices always there. And some of these voices, my point would be that sometimes it's very difficult to analyze one of these processes through polar explanations. A, B, black, white, Wasteocene, commoning on the other side, all these polar, because you have very different voices. We were talking about, for example, the entrepreneurs, the capitalists inside the firm, the industry, responsible for pollution. It's very hard to get their voice, but maybe there is some public statement in the public sphere there, but there are journalists, for example. There are scientists maybe quite committed to try to improve some of the industrial processes and trying to establish a dialogue between workers, or even visiting the communities and trying or even taking epidemiological samples to try to show in academic papers that many people get cancer there because of the film. That means we have a sort of huge range of voices in many of these controversies. To what extent we are not simplifying the problem just using a sort of perhaps too rigid polar approach? What do you think? It's a bit a provocative question. We discussed that, I think, some time ago in different places, in other places.
It's true.
But this is still a very important concern for historians of science and for environmental history.
Thank you, Agustin. I mean, maybe the thing I am a bit struggling with is that personally, I don't think, at least I hope, I have not written or talked against science or against scientists. And personally, I also believe, but even, if you think about government, you can say that there are also activists inside the government. You have also people sometimes, struggling inside, governmental agencies trying to survive. I mean, I am an academic myself. I get my salary from ICREA, right? So what I am, an academic, I am an activist, I am somebody politically engaged. So I think that the issue is not precisely, I agree with you, the issue is not to polarize. In the case of Vaillant, for instance, of the dam disaster, the Vaillant dam disaster, the communities there, they were not against science. They were asking, really begging for a geologist to do his or her work. They were not doing, the work of a geologist. They wanted somebody to do it. The problem is that we are talking about, I am talking about some specific cases. So in the case of the trial, of the Vaillant trial, what happened was that the public prosecutor was unable to find anyone among the Italian professors willing to sit to side with them against the corporation. There was only one guy in all Italy. His name was Floriano Calvino. You are thinking, it must be a common name. No, it's not. It's the brother. Floriano Calvino. He decided to work with the public prosecutor. He was in a precarious situation in the university as a geologist. Let's see if anyone can guess what happened to him. He was in a precarious situation. He decided to work with the public prosecutor. What happened? No, he got in the end, but he was fired immediately, okay? So I am talking about this science. If you want me to talk about, and then I should also say that the public prosecutor found 6 people from all over Europe, scientists, who wanted to help him in this trial. So I am not against science. I just believe that there is capitalist science and there is a class science. So there is somebody who's on the side of the workers and somebody who's actually on the side of others. Because what I should say here is that there was 24 professors working with the corporations to prove that it was impossible to foresee the disaster. So I am not, I think that precisely these frictions are what is interesting for me, because otherwise it would be easy. I could say, you know what, forget about science. The only thing is that you go there, you speak with this guy in the street, and you understand everything about the geology of the valley. No, and this is the all. No, I don't think so. I think that there is a friction. The friction is inside science. There is a friction inside even the government. There was one guy in charge of the public works in the province. He was, very attentive. He was very skeptical of this dam. Well, he was removed by the government immediately, and somebody else was brought in who was completely with the corporation. So again, I am not saying that the bad guys are on one side and the good guys are the other. Desidera, the engineer, he was a public official in the system, and he was with the community. However, I must, as a good historian, I must tell you that he was removed. So I think that the point is again about power. And maybe the only thing I believe is that we cannot ignore power. So in many cases, not always, but in many cases, at least in some cases, these frictions inside science, this friction inside the government, this friction and so on and so on, is not just a free friction, somebody saying something and somebody saying something different. It's somebody who got 1 million from the corporation and somebody who is working for free for the community. So this is what I'm interested in. But I am not saying that, it's a polar dichotomy between, scientists bad, I don't know, farmers good. I hope that I'm not giving this impression. So scientists, I agree we need to precisely to work, explore, research this friction, and maybe understand that sometimes the friction is also power related. And I also think that the power is interesting when we think about science, also because there is an illuministic idea, I think, of environmental problems. No? Many times I listen to people saying, okay, if the public would know about climate change, about fossil fuel, about, pollution, they would. But they would what? If you live in the Ballier in Paris and you don't have the money to afford a nice apartment in the Champs-Élysées, it's not that I explain to you that fossil fuel are bad. It's a matter that I give you the possibility to not use the fucking car. If I tell the miners in the Appalachia that mining is so bad for the environment, it's not the same if I give the possibility to not be trapped in the job blackmail, right? I think it's English, the job. So there is a bit an illuministic thing. Science is very important, but there is also power. There are how can I say, the material constraints. And I think that we need also to work on these material constraints. And I believe that sometimes we are a little bit, maybe in this sense, we are sometimes a bit, as I said, illuministic. The science will change the world. I mean, science will help in understanding the world, but then you need different kind of socio-ecological relationships to change the world. Otherwise, you will have a very clear understanding of what is happening, but you will be trapped. Then, of course, people can make also very courageous decision. I have, for instance, in the Vaillant story, there is one worker who saved himself because he decided to quit. Basically, he was too scared. He understood that something was happening and said, you know what, I am quitting. So basically, he saved himself because the workers were the first one who were killed. So I am not saying that, there is no freedom. It would be a little bit too much to say that. Of course, there is freedom. There are, workers that can say no, and so on and so forth. But, in more general terms, maybe it would be different not to put somebody in a position of choosing between paying the bills or surviving.
Okay, then I think we are well over the schedule now. So we must finish, and I just want to thank you once more for this talk, and to all of you for your comments and questions. And we will be able to continue these discussions tomorrow at 9, here. So, well,
thank you.
Thanks, Marco.
Thank
for
you. Thank you so much.